So, Anthony, first of all, thank you so much for being on the show. I really
Of course.
appreciate it. I know we started going down a path of discussion in the green room, and I just said, you know what, let's hit record because most of the content we record on this show is primarily like go to market and founder startup stuff, which is
hmm
great. And I'd love to get your opinion on some of those pieces here too. But I think it's also important to highlight some of the stuff that is maybe much bigger than just tactical, business execution. And you said something in the green room that I wanted to kind of record and start to push out there to the folks to kind of embed a seed of thought. And maybe there's folks out there who are already thinking about this. If you are, I'd love to hear your ideas or your kind of feedback in the comments. But it's this idea around the identity that we have. Like that really resonated with me when you mentioned it, because
hmm
I've talked about this many, many times in my own sort of introspective kind of conversations. And it's that for so long, my identity was wrapped around who I was as a startup founder or as a business
Right.
person. Right.
Right.
And I've gone through a bit of an evolution there, and I think having a wife and a family has been very influential there, and gone through a
Yeah.
lot of those kind of journeys, to say the least. But there's this other bigger thing that I think the current AI revolution is sort of going to impact our species around, and it's what you said, how we perceive work and how we perceive our identity around that. And one last thing I wanted to say was I was having a conversation with a really good friend of mine, Mark Roberge, who was
Oh yeah, of course.
HubSpot. And Mark and I, we got very philosophical, and Mark said, George, I think that we're going to be in a post-work society sooner than we
Yeah.
think. And if we don't have to work because maybe there's some sort of, I don't know, some currency or some way of bartering stuff, or however it ends up unfolding, right? Crypto based
Yeah.
thing, whatever. If we don't, then what do we do? And I think part of the kind of the upside or the sort of positive outlook was, well, does that mean that we now have time to do stuff like actually spend time with our family, actually dig into our spiritual kind
Yeah.
of aspects of who we are as a human? So I'll pause there. That really
Yeah.
resonated when you mentioned that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I see it the same way. And what's interesting is I'm unclear, as I guess all of us are, but like there's folks much smarter than me predicting what like the ultimate outcome is. I'm more worried about the next like 10 years of the disruption period, like the period between where we were 3 years ago before no one knew what ChatGPT even was or meant, to where we're going over the next couple of years. And you're right, like whether we want to or not, or whether it's a good thing or not, we so often wrap our identity around our work. Oh, what does your, father do? What does your mother do? Like those are kind of the questions that the first like three questions that come up. And so the challenge is, what I do believe is that AI will candidly automate, or I would say it would disrupt 100% of what we call knowledge work today. But I think it will candidly probably automate about 80 to 90% of it over the next decade. And we're talking about 1 billion people who are knowledge workers in the world that are, working with computers and, software, and they're building software. And so this is a massive, massive disruption. But I think that, to your point, and to the point where we're chatting about the green room, it's like, how can we reconcile who we are, what we stand for, our role within sort of like meaning of life level questions in a world where, your job is being outsourced to compute. And so that's where, I don't have all of the answers. It's just striking to me that like literally, I think $1 trillion in 2025 went into funding the acceleration of this future, which I think is great. I'm not an anti-AI person or anything along those lines. But almost nothing went into actually serving the humans that are going to have to be productive and find meaning on the other side of all of this work. So I'm really interested in kind of, how do you think about wellness? Because there's also all of this like wellness trend happening. I think your neck of the woods is quite a bit happening as well,
Yeah.
around kind of how do we go analog? How do we invest in community? How do we almost get back some of that nostalgia for the pre-internet days? And I'm curious to see kind of what happens as all of those trends kind of converge going forward.
Yeah, it's certainly super interesting. And I have an intuitive feeling that this departure from our humanness
Hmm.
will bring us back and drive the thirst for that which makes us so human, um, and it'll rise that to the top. So
Yeah.
that's at least what I feel. I mean, if you look at what happened during the lockdowns and all that stuff, like we were going crazy to go and see each other again, right? And
Yes.
now events and these sort of things in our industry is so huge, right? For a
Totally.
reason. And so I think like at least that's what I feel intuitively. I wanted to ask you from a marketing perspective, because for the
Yeah.
folks out there, yeah, you are one of the experts and most prominent marketers in B2B software, right?
Thanks.
And you've walked the walk, you've done it, you've built great brands like Gainsight and a plethora of other ones. So I was going to ask you, like, if what is kind of your perspective of how that function, I guess even just here in the short term, because 10 years from now we'll see what happens, but in the short
Yeah.
term, for all of us who are marketers out there trying to kind of figure out what to do, like, how do you see that evolution kind of
Yeah.
unfolding? How should we start to think about adapting?
Yeah. Well, a big part of it is, for me, I've spent the last year trying to watch, observe, use some of the new tools, talk to a bunch of recruiters, founders, and try to answer that question, try to reconcile effectively all of these data points. And the best conclusion I can come up with is that, again, I don't know, draw your line somewhere, but call it, for the sake of argument, 80% of what we call marketing today will just be automated away. Like those jobs to be done, we will hire agents, software to do that work for us. Now, when I say that, it sounds really bad, but I don't think it has to be necessarily. In that, this is a lot of the transactional marketing motions, right? Like A/B testing landing pages, like nurture email sequencing, reporting, like a lot of the like lead scoring, these things that we've done that we've had, like, without any disrespect to anyone, like we've hired humans to like push these buttons to do this work. Maybe it's okay that some of that stuff gets picked up by machines that are going to do it better and 24 hours a day, and they speak every language and they don't get tired. And I still think there's a role for human experts on the demand side of the business as well. It's like be managing those agents and those workflows and kind of being accountable in this sort of like company of human people that are running the business around change management and building good relationships and all of that. But I think the disruption is pretty massive there. The 20% that's left, to me, is the things that, even in a world that a machine could automate that, we would still choose humans to do that work. And to me, this is where a lot of what I call like brand humanity shows up. It's being authentic as a founder and telling your founder story, sharing that with the world. It's emotional narratives and storytelling. It's creativity. How do you sort of exercise creativity as a brand, as a founding team, as a brand design team, whatever. It's purpose. How do you instill a sense of purpose for your team, or for your customers that are sort of taking this more like trusting you as the leader of the movement to kind of lead them into this new reality. Similar to that note, how do you build connection between your brand and the audience that you serve? How do you create a sense of belonging within your community? All of these things are things that machines don't do. They'll help you like do the things to be better at that, but you need humans to do it. And beyond it, I think it's the campaigns and the brand identities and the language and the stories that are the most human, that resonate the most with the market. And the proof point for that is OpenAI. They should technically be like the Terminator brand. Ultimately, it's cold and robotic and whatever and minimalist. But what was their brand campaign like that they just launched? What was it? Probably now a month and a half ago. It was nostalgic and warm and very people driven, right? Anthropic is opening up like these coffee shop cafe activations with like merch and stuff. So I think that spells really good news for the creative marketers, for the marketers who feel like, whether you're a content kind of driven marketer, an event marketer, a storyteller, former like journalist turned marketer, like that group is going to, I think, rise in importance within the overall marketing mix, in close partnership with our team that's going to be kind of accountable to driving the outcome using a lot of the technology. But I think that's sort of like the new mix of the marketing team that we'll see going forward.
As you articulate these concepts, I can't help but think that these are the fun aspects of marketing, right? Like,
Yes.
I don't know anybody who loved A/B testing and clicking on buttons. I can tell you that.
Exactly.
I certainly didn't enjoy it. And it kind of speaks to more of the artist in me, right? That was one of the things that right? That's one of the things I love about video and what we're doing right now on this show is the ability to almost like perform, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that kind of like performance kind of aspect that really soothes the soul. What does that mean, Anthony? What does that mean for like the CMOs out there, right, who are thinking about building their team, investing the resources that they're given from leadership teams that may or may not be what they used to be, right? I think it probably depends.
This is where, again, I'm learning, but a lot of my conversations with recruiters have been, and investors, board members, has been really instructive to think about what's next for the CMO. A couple things are sort of starting to come up. One is, and this is hard to hear, but experience isn't as important anymore, or at least relative to aptitude or your willingness to exercise first principles and be hands-on with technology. There's just so much like knowledge, for lack of a better term, in these foundational models that it's more so how can you put that knowledge to work, and not just be like a manager of people and a change kind of driver and influencer within your business, but how can you get practical, hands-on, and build stuff fast? The pace of work is changing so much. So I think that means if you are, I'm about 18 years or so into my career, almost 20 years. I'm like, it's not that I have to unlearn everything that I've learned, and it's not that the Gainside experience or whatever isn't like completely relevant anymore. It's just that the playbooks that I've built my career on are irrelevant now. And I got to come to terms with that and not like go be sad about it, but bring a sense of like curiosity and excitement to like rewrite kind of what the next chapter of marketing looks like. And so I think that's the lesson for all of us is, okay, well, the thing we did 1, 2, 3, 5 companies ago, it's not like we want to honor that and respect it, but say that's not going to work today. So how do we go forward? No one has the answer. No one has like the new playbook. We're all trying it and learning together. And it's pretty exciting. Like I think to the extent we can be excited about that and lean into that versus like run away from it as a CMO, I think that's the opportunity.
And if you had to kind of think about the board slides, right? So you're the CMO or you're the head of marketing, and your CEO is interviewing you, or let's just say you're in that process, and you got to say, okay, I got to put together some very tactical plays to run here. I can't use the old, playbook that I used to use,
Yeah.
and then the human kind of emotional stuff that we were talking about earlier resonating, with the customer or prospect in that way. It may be something that some CEOs may not be able to wrap their head around, at least early
Yeah.
on. What does that initial play or set of plays, like 2 or 3 plays, look like? Like, if I'm now being asked to actually deploy it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess a couple things. Last time I was in a boardroom was about a year ago, as a founder for a few years. And so as a CMO now, it's been about 3 or 4. So with that, with that disclaimer, um, I'd say maybe a couple of things. One, broad answer, and then directly answering your question. On the broad side, it's also kind of stage dependent, where
Mm.
and there's a lot of like early stage companies where we're not even seeing a CMO, and in some cases we're not even seeing a head of marketing. We're seeing a head of go to market. So more of an integrated kind of marketing, sales, customer success kind of function. And so in that context, it's sort of like you've got like your members of the technical staff, and then you've got go to market, and that's sort of like the two sides of the team or of the business. So there's sort of two parts of the organization. Like you'll have like your members of the technical staff, and then your go to market team. So I think in that context, the specific plays you run are going to be kind of dependent on what the goals are for the broader kind of revenue function at the company. And so something in close consideration to what sales needs, how we think about our customers, and so on. However, if you put a gun to my head and say, what are like the 3 things that you're going to try or start with? I'd say the first is I'd want to make sure that the narrative we develop for the brand is resonant and uniquely ownable by us. And so that's doing sort of a messaging exercise, not just around product and feature functionality, and the what or how story, but more of the why story as well. How do we stand out? Why does it matter? Why does the work that we do matter? Because that's going to be how we break through the noise. If our story is not, like if we're just talking about like a bunch of features or comparing ourselves to a competitor, we get lost in the sea of sameness, if you will. And so I would probably start there and either audit our existing narrative and or come up with some strong brand positioning for the company. That's not going to drive immediate leads for us, but it's an exercise, kind of like a foundational exercise worth doing. Second then is, how do we get as many people in the world to hear this story? And that's where content comes in. And you're a pioneer in this space, but how do we think about kind of scaling our ability to activate this message out to our audience and start looking at engagement? And so much has changed now over the years, right? Like we have a home studio here that looks a little bit more kind of professional than it might have looked a decade ago, probably a fraction of the cost. Short form content is a thing to kind of break through the algorithm. Companies like Substack and others are helping us kind of own our audience relationships with newsletters. And so how do we think about just like executing a content strategy in the right channels where our audience exists in order to start activating that story? And then the third one is events. Like I would just be really thoughtful around how do we build that authentic, trusted relationship with our audience, knowing well that they are inundated with messaging or content in their feeds or whatever. That's like our volume game. We're trying to get as much out there as we can to like keep up with the waves that are in the ocean. But the event is sort of how we can kind of be a bit more thoughtful, deliberate, hands-on, high touch. And again, it'll vary by stage. If you're like super early stage, where you have a handful of customers, could we build like a kind of like a lighthouse customer moment where we bring our best customers together, invest in them, and help enroll them in this movement that we're creating? And if so, can we capture some testimonial videos while we're there, or film a podcast, or figure out how can we kind of make it sort of a win-win? If you're a little further along, it might be an industry event around that very narrative that we started with. And that might be more top of funnel oriented. And maybe that's not like the conferences of the past. Maybe again, it's more like a retreat or something that's a bit more intimate or intentional. So anyway, it was an extremely long answer, but I think those are the three programs. If I'm like, I don't know anything about the company, but I'm going to take a stab at a recommendation. Do we have the right story? Can we get it out in front of the right audience and build distribution? And can we gather the right people together to build intimacy with our core audience?
As you were explaining the first piece, that the story piece and the positioning and the meaning, right? And the why, I think is the way you articulated it.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but think that I was listening to a marketer speaking about a consumer brand.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
right? I try to embody that as often as I can because I'm jealous of all of them, but yeah.
Right? Because like I think one of the things that I certainly have never heard or I've tried to articulate in meetings in certain scenarios in B2B SaaS was this idea of like, how do we resonate, all the emotional stuff
totally.
we talked about that you've heard so much in consumer marketing. It's almost been at the core of that, right? You've heard about how does Coca-Cola make you feel, Red Bull, et cetera, right?
Right.
So are we saying that we now have to operate because of the way that our B2B marketing motions and playbooks and et cetera have now been disrupted? We really have to think about brand in a way within B2B that we've never had to in the past?
Yes. I've been saying it for 13 years. But I think now it's like, what's left? Right?
Yeah.
Like, we're all going to be like really good at lead scoring because we're going to have PhD level super intelligence that's going to be scoring our leads for us. We're all going to be extremely good at paid ad optimization. Great. And it's a race to the bottom, right? If we're all leveraging the same tools to get really good at all of that stuff. But the challenge is like only 5% of any brand's given audience is in market for products. So we're competing for that 5%. So what about the 95% that's paying attention, but they're not ready to buy anything yet today? That's brand. That's where brand is all about, like building, by educating that audience, by entertaining that audience, by somehow serving them in this sort of like breadth of reciprocity in a way that like, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of value for free with no commitment for you to buy anything from us or anything. Just follow us online or whatever. And the idea is when they are ready to buy, when they're ready to go from the 95 to the 5%, they're going to think of us first. But that's the bet, right? They may not, or they may not buy, but hopefully they'll think of us. And so I think this is sort of, it's not that brand is going to be more important. It's that every other part of marketing is going to go away and brand is all that's left.
It reminds me of several conversations I've had recently with some venture investors and engineers. And it is that I know the impact that I've been feeling as a marketer, but one of the things that's been really standing out is the impact that your application layer, right? Your software engineer is having right now when their jobs have largely been democratized. I was just chatting with a good friend of mine who's a super non-technical individual. Not that I'm technical by any means, but I think I'm a little more technical than this individual. He literally just rebuilt like a Hootsuite analytics product, like in 3 days, right? Yeah. Now I can tell it's, he used an LLM, at least on the front end, because it looks like pretty templatized and there's no logo or whatever, but the analytics, the functionality is unbelievable. It's something that would have taken a year, in the past, and he was able to do it in a couple of days. And so if you think about your average software developer, like they have really been disrupted, at least at the again,
Yeah.
at the application layer. And another thing that these venture investors have been communicating is, well, what does that actually do to the valuation of companies, right? When back in the day you had to hire, let's just say, a team of software engineers to build these things, and now you can get pretty far vibe coding, right, for the
Yeah.
most part, and with a fraction of the technical talent, right? So it's, again, really, really gnarly when we think about that. So not only
Yeah.
are we impacted as marketers or go-to-market folks, but like the entire organization. And it maps back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, this is a
Yeah.
species level kind of thing that we're experiencing here. Again, not
It's
to be
true.
too dramatic, folks, but like, I think we have to embrace it, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise you end up getting caught in the fear, right, of
Yeah.
the unknown.
Yeah. It's like, let's not run away from that, but let's maybe proceed with some cautious optimism. But what all I know is what you can't do is what you've done before and just like proceed like everything's okay or everything's the same. That's not. And then I will give you a quick story. I haven't shared this publicly yet. But we raised for Audience Plus about $12 million over 2 rounds. So in about 3 years, building the product, arguing over architectural kind of decisions, built it the wrong way, had to rebuild it again, go through all of that. I built the front end 2 weeks ago in Lovable in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Unbelievable.
flabbergasted.
Right? Yeah.
Flabbergasted. Not the entire product, but give me like 3 days. I bet I could finish it.
Yeah.
And that as I've been engaging with those tools, especially like Lovable and Bolt.new and some of the others, and you see like your ability now that anyone can build software. Wabi, I think, is another one that just launched like this last week or something. But part of my existential question is like, will there be software companies in the next 5 to 8 years or something? Or is all software going to be custom and proprietary and like build me a CRM for my specific use case and it's going to be done for you perfectly for the same kind of subscription? So I don't know. But again, I don't want to scare your audience either.
Yeah.
Like, let's just like go in with this curiosity and adapt. And I think that's the best sort of way we can position ourselves for success going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your wisdom. If folks want to follow your content, get to know you, what are the best channels to reach you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the best.
Okay.
Anthony Kennada. Yeah, that's probably the best place to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful, wonderful day, my brother.
Thanks, Jorge. You as well. Thanks so much for having me on.